filmmaker, musician, photographer, right? And most importantly, former resident here at Lei in
Former
Taiwan.
resident Lei.
One of the
And this
first
was about
residents.
10 years ago, right?
I think it was maybe 10 or 11 years ago, 2011, I think.
Mm,
You were
mm,
one of
mm.
the first group of resident artists here. You and Sheena, me.
Right.
Yeah. So I guess
Um,
I should point out that you were supposed to have a show here in January, just a couple of months ago, but because of the travel restrictions, you weren't able to come to Taiwan. So hopefully, at the end of this year, in November or maybe December, you'll be having a show here.
right. Exactly. Yeah.
You worked as a filmmaker in Taiwan and also in South Africa.
Yes. I just I was working in Taipei and I was doing television there for an American company. And then I moved to New York for a couple of years and I was working on documentaries and some TV series there as an editor. And then I moved back to Taiwan and that's when I met you.
Hmm. That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah, you used to come into Stock 20 a lot because you lived just down the street.
Yeah, that's
That's where
right.
we
That's
met.
when we met, right? You had a studio there. Right, right.
And so after you left here, you went back to South Africa for a while, right? You were working film between a few countries.
Yeah. So after I left Taiwan, I moved back to South Africa and I was making mostly music videos and television commercials. And I was flying a lot to Uganda and Tanzania. So I was kind of between South Africa and Tanzania and Uganda for a few years.
So you've been in Tokyo for 5 years,
Yes.
and I don't remember. I don't remember you doing a lot of photography necessarily, at least consciously as an art form when you were here. So
Yeah.
how did you start that? And
Okay. Trying to make it a short story. So I've been dealing with cameras for about 20 years in as a television director and editor. I've shot a lot with video cameras, but taking photography as an art form has been quite recent. I I used to have a kind of a little Sony Cybershot way back in the early 2000s, and I used to take a lot of photos and I enjoyed it, but I never took it very seriously. And when COVID hit, I started taking it really seriously because I was prior to that I was working as a musician in Tokyo and I was performing with a lot of dancers, contemporary dancers, right? Also in a Japanese dance called Buto, which is do you know what Buto dance
I
is?
don't.
It's kind of a dance form. It's called the dance of death. It's quite often dance is completely covered in white paint, like body paint, and it's a style of dance that developed in the 1950s and 60s in Tokyo. And I was quite involved with those dancers and other contemporary dancers up to when COVID hit as a live performer. And then suddenly concerts disappeared, and there was nothing. There was no more shows. And then I got this idea of photographing them so that we can continue our relationship and what we were doing together, our collaboration. And it kind of developed out of that. So I started taking up photography again when I moved to Tokyo because Tokyo is kind of mecca for photography. I guess like Paris was for painting a while back, 100 years ago. Like cameras are everywhere, models are freely available. It's just the city is built on photography as an art form. There's an incredible photography museum here. There are many galleries that cater only to photography. Right, so it's quite. I think it's quite unique in that way. And then I started taking photographs of dancers, and then you approached me to do a show at Lei, and I decided to continue with that series and kind of concentrate that on this show. So that's why basically all of the photographs that I'm taking at the moment are of dancers.
You had been playing music, right? In those shows.
Yes, yes. So I used to perform with all of the dancers features in the photos that we'll see now and that you'll see at the show are people I performed with on stage previously. Yeah, yeah.
Right. So yeah, let's have a look at some of these pictures, and maybe you can tell us
Yeah.
a little about them. Just kind of scroll through while you talk. Um, The thing that I noticed first that I like the most at
Mm.
having worked in black and white, most of my career, is I love the contrast and the kind of the spotting of the black and the white and the kind of patterning. Secondarily, I guess I would say a lot of the textures, but for me, the black and white rhythms that come out of this are what attract me the most.
I thought you would like that. Yeah, we both work in monochrome exclusively, right?
Yeah,
Which is interesting. I think as artists we also understand that we need to limit ourselves sometimes, right? The more that you limit yourself, the more freedom you have in a way.
yeah, I think that's right.
Ironically,
Yeah, put some constraints and then you can kind of operate within those. Too
right?
much open endedness is just impossible to deal with.
Exactly. Yeah. So I decided to work with dancers and the body, especially the female form, and using the city as a backdrop. You know, um, and not always as a backdrop, but actually as something that is included as a foreground as well. You know, it's not that the human body is only placed in the city, but it's one becomes one entity.
And I think
So
the contrast between the figure in this one, the shapes that make up the figure are pretty smooth and flat, and the shapes that are like the background is where all the texture and the grit, right? And that's a really nice sort of secondary contrast.
right, yeah.
You
So
see it
that
here, like
first
on the right
photo,
side as well. The legs are kind of a
mm,
silhouette almost, and the shoes are almost a silhouette. And then you have like on the
yeah,
right and on the bottom this gritty texture.
this is interesting because what I've been doing a lot of lately is photographing dancers on the ground at an angle at which the surface of the ground becomes flat, right? So this is also kind of there's some technical definitions here as well. Like if you shoot at a very closed aperture on the camera, then you have a very deep depth of field, which means that everything in the frame is in focus,
Hmm.
right? So that's why it appears very flat. And I've been concentrating on that a lot to get these kind of very flat looking photos.
Yeah, it's a very great effect. And I always think
Mm.
like when I'm working in black and white, I think a lot about what percentage of the composition is black, what percent is white, and what percent is gray. And like if you blur your eyes here, you have basically those three, right? You have the hands and the legs, that's the white. You have the figure and the shadow is the black, and then the rest of it is the gray. And you have like this, I forget, there's some rules, like there's the 60-30-10 or something like this, right?
Yeah, Ansel Adams, the American photographer, worked out a lot of these kind of gradients between black and white, right? And how to balance these. I don't know if I'm consciously aware of it so much.
Yeah, I think
Other,
that
yeah,
most of the time, like these kinds of things in art are partly conscious and partly unconscious, subconscious, right? And sometimes you focus on them, and sometimes you don't, and sometimes they just happen.
yeah. And I also like like if you go back to that previous photo, like that in this particular scene, I probably shot 200 or 300 photos.
Hmm.
You know what I mean? And chose this one. So there is a lot of work that goes into this,
How much
and
post production do you do?
very little. I do put this into Photoshop, and like in this particular shot, actually, I think there was a mask because it's still COVID time. There was a mask in her pocket that I had to Photoshop out because
Uh,
we forgot to take it out. So there was like a little white piece sticking out of her pocket. So I do use Photoshop sometimes to take out things that I would have taken out if I noticed them at the time, which I didn't in this case.
it's a good use.
So yeah, so there is some post production. There's no product post production at all. This is Kana Anayama. She's a dancer I've worked with extensively. This is on the beach, hence the fishnets.
Are those like those big breaker cement blocks?
Exactly. Yeah. So this is done on like a bright sunny day, quite cold. And I love how black and white can really transform the scene. Like you can't really imagine when this was taken, what time of day, what season. right? All those things kind of go out of the window when it's black and white. You're into kind of a different reality. This is done on the same day, same place, same model.
It's interesting because you talked before in the other one about trying to make it as flat as possible, right? And this one has so much depth just implied from the horizon and the sort of the way the scene is, but at the same time, it looks almost like sort of flat, like you laid in each kind of surface, almost like with a palette knife or something.
Right. But if you notice, the horizon is still in focus. So the entire scene is in focus.
Yeah, so that contributes to that feeling then, huh?
Exactly, yeah. Which is quite different from the way the kind of, let's say, the Instagram photography style has been very much the opposite of this, of having a lot of depth, a very shallow depth of field, and having the background very much out of focus. So I'm trying to do something a bit different from that with this.
And these figures like that, the foreground, the toes, just bending like that. It's so dynamic. I wonder if that's either in motion or if that's just product of, I don't know, dancers having the kind of muscle control. Like
So, she does this often with her toes.
it adds so much movement to it. I don't know.
Right.
Was this a like a moving shot that you just captured the second out of, or was this a pose that was chosen, like wound up into?
This is movement, but it's relatively slow, as I recall. And there's this figure walking in the background as well, which is quite
Oh
interesting,
yeah, yeah, I can see that.
right? So it makes it quite eerie and cinema nouveau, I
Hmm.
guess. This is in an area of Tokyo that tourists would know. It's called Golden Gai. It's an area of these very closely packed bars with these little dirty little alleys running through the streets, and this is done in one of those alleys.
This is almost
And
like it's like an altar of some kind.
this was done in movement, so these are shot quite fast. Like she's moving quite fast here.
Is that the
Uh,
background? Is that just like water stains? What's the setting for this one?
yeah, the background is that is the wall. On top of that wall is a train track,
All
a
right.
massive train track. So it's ancient. It's many decades old, and that is all kinds of stains and plants in the background. I love that texture. I'm very attracted to kind of dirty Tokyo. You know, Tokyo has clean Tokyo and has dirty Tokyo.
Hmm.
Very much like Taipei, I guess. You know,
Yeah.
and Taichung. And I'm attracted to putting models in front of contrasting backgrounds, right? Which is kind of, I guess, a sexiness, right? When you put someone in front of a very dirty background and they're very clean, and the cleanliness pops and the dirtiness pops. So there's a lot of that happening
Yeah, multiple
in these.
layers of contrast, right?
Right. Exactly. Yeah.
So you talk a lot about Tokyo, and I'm wondering what's the difference between like Taiwan and Japan, the art scenes. What do you think?
It's quite different. There is a very long history here of professional artists, right? So if we're speaking about photography specifically, there are many Japanese photographers who have been pivotal in the history of Japanese photography and are very influential worldwide still. You know, um, most notably Daido Moriyama, Nobuyoshi Araki. Araki is world famous, um, and they have big shows here. You know, that attract many thousands of people. And I don't know if any photographers anywhere in the world can still attract thousands of people to a exhibition. You
Hmm.
know. So the art scene here is very big and very much alive. It's huge, and many galleries, much more than I at least experienced in Taiwan. And the galleries here cater for Japanese artists more than overseas artists. So especially the Tokyo Museum of Photography seems to have mostly Japanese photographers.
What do you think
So
about living in a place like that where the art scene is so huge compared to living in a place like Taichung where the art scene is fairly small, I would say? What do you think
Well, the
that?
art scene at Lei Gallery was huge, man.
Oh, I mean, of course, us, yeah. I mean, the city, right?
Like,
Like, we're no Tokyo. What do you? Are there advantages and disadvantages?
it's a bit like in New York. I lived in New York for a while, and when I was in New York, I kind of you shit your pants when you arrive in New York, right? Because it's so intimidating. There's so much happening. Everyone is so much better than you, younger than you, better than you, richer than you. And Tokyo is similar to that, where you have to get off your ass, you have to work if you want to do something here. So I think being in a place where there's a lot of art, it depends on your personality, but being in a place where there's a lot of art, you're gonna work, right?
Right.
Because you get intimidated easily here. There's a lot of amazing things happening around me all the time. So I feel like I have to improve constantly. Where for my own personality, if I'm in a place with less art, I tend to get more lazy.
Yeah, I guess a great motivator, right? When you're surrounded by so much excellence, you have almost no choice but to either just drop out or to really push yourself.
Right, yeah, depending on who you are. Different artists are different. Some people need quiet and space. This photo we're looking at now
This
here
is
again,
beautiful.
also again, the flat. This is if you looked at this scene with your naked eyes, you wouldn't see anything special, right? Like this was a hill at a in a park. Um, if you panned up just 5 meters from the top, you'll see Tokyo Tower.
Hmm.
So we're right below a massive kind of structure here. This is very far from being nature.
Yeah, this looks like
Um,
it's middle of the forest, kind of.
yeah, yeah, yeah. This is just a trick of cropping. Like a meter in either direction, there's stuff. So I just found this one little strip that we could utilize for this.
That is great.
And these are autumn leaves. The autumn in Japan is incredibly beautiful, a bit like upstate New York.
Hmm.
Everything is just unbelievably beautiful. The color version of this is gorgeous, but that's those times when you're photographing in black and white and you're kind of torn to use a color photo. This is a dancer named Sawako Oka. She trained with some great Buto dancers in Tokyo. What she's holding in her hand is actually paper. It's a Japanese rice paper that's just incredibly thin. And that was done at sunset.
So this is one of my
Uh,
favorites. I've drawn this one before. I love this one.
right. Yeah, yeah, yeah. This is in that same location actually as the one with the leaves. Again, I work with really talented people. So when I speak to them about this, they usually tell me that they think I'm doing all the work and they're doing nothing,
Hmm.
right? And I feel the same. I feel like I'm doing nothing and they're doing work. So it's quite a special relationship I have with these models.
That's a good collaboration.
Yeah, it's perfect. It's
Yeah.
incredible collaboration. So with her especially, we've done a lot of live performances together. We work together very well, and I feel like with I don't direct the models almost ever. You know, they kind of improvise in front of me,
Hmm.
and I try to capture that.
So this was improvised.
Yes, she was just dancing in front of the street. Again, I probably took 100 photos here. A male model, finally.
Look at that background. It's like a wallpaper kind of. It looked like the before the fancy green screen. If you had just like a sticker on the wall behind you in the TV studio or something.
Right, exactly. Mm.
And that's that depth of field trick again, right?
Yes. Yeah. Here the background is
It's a
actually
bit
quite out
blurry,
of
but
focus. It's
yeah,
quite dark, so I
but it's
had to shoot with an open aperture. But he is covered in white body paint,
huh.
which adds to this somewhat unnatural feeling one has when looking at this. Like it looks like it's just his naked body, but he's white, white, white. So this was in a very dark space, but because of the white paint on his body, it really lit him up. I think that's moonlight. This
Wow,
light.
that's strong.
Yeah.
That's
It's
the white paint,
he's
right?
literally painted with white paint,
Huh.
head to toe. Yeah.
Is this
Same
the same figure?
same from the back. Yeah. Yeah. the only photograph in this series that I did with a flash, and I like the fact that she seems to be covering her face like paparazzi,
Right.
right? So the flash is kind of pushing her back, and she's kind of pushing against the camera. There's quite a sense of violence here to me.
Is there are there a lot of Japanese paparazzi?
No, no. I mean, they must exist, but the Japanese are so polite. You can't imagine a Japanese paparazzi. It's the model Shoko Tamai. She lives in New York. That is actually behind her is cherry blossoms, sakura. Again, a color photograph would be completely pink.
This almost looks like she's gonna slide down. The way the angle of the building and the angle of the floor are.
Yes. Yeah. I particularly like this photograph for that reason. That it's off kilter, right?
And the way that the shadow is almost standing on that. There's that diagonal that comes down of the darker gray, and that line where it cuts between the dark gray and the light gray, and the foot is kind of just tiptoed on there.
You've probably noticed I use shadows a lot.
Yeah.
Right? De Chirico, the Italian painter, it's always a big influence. So I love that kind of deep, dark shadow that gives you some kind of feeling of anxiety.
Again, the diagonal from the top of the building, that shadow shape, where it just turns into the white of the dress.
Yeah, I'm obviously playing with textures here a lot. Just to the right of us is Tokyo Station, and it's a very popular place for wedding photography. So if you go there like on a weekend, there are literally like a dozen couples with a camera crew, and they're shooting wedding photos. Not with this as a backdrop, but with Tokyo Station as a backdrop, which is like a 100-year-old building. Interestingly enough, she showed up with this white dress to this shoot. I don't know if that was deliberate, but kind of like a wedding dress. That's perhaps the point here. I love shooting kind of this is a kind of a Stanley Kubrick shot, right?
Yeah. Something about it reminds me of Bjork. I don't know why.
I was gonna say, yeah, definitely Bjork photo.
Yeah. I love so like in the perspective, right? The parallel lines get further away as you go up to the top, but then at the bottom, how they're really close together too, almost gives it almost like a horizontal fisheye kind of a feel.
Exactly. I shoot with a lot of very wide angle, which is a kind of a unusual choice for shooting people, right? Because those lenses tend to bend their limbs into strange shapes, right, and distort them. But I quite enjoy using most of the photos I take are wide angle lenses.
Does that distortion? Do you think it shows up in the figures and pushes the dynamism of them?
Yes, but if you keep the figure in the center of the frame, it actually doesn't distort them. It distorts their background only. Right. So there's ways to use it intelligently, I guess, and not make it obvious that you're distorting anything.
Here's some more great texture.
Filthy place that we shot this in. I would not sit where she was sitting. Yeah. Well, I probably was sitting there, but this is shot at golden hour. I try to often shoot at that. That hour or two before sunset.
So how does that affect the black and white?
Good question. It affects it greatly. Like golden hour also has an effect on the color, of course, of light, but it's very soft. Since I'm using natural or available light in all of these photos, the quality of light is extremely important. So if there is direct sunlight, like in this photo, then having that golden hour quality of light is really, really important. And I mean, this looks like it could be taken in a studio, right?
Yeah, it sure does. It looks very controlled.
Right. And it completely isn't. Other than the fact that I saw this light on the wall, we sat down and we took this very quickly.
Well, that's awesome. I'm looking forward to hopefully seeing those in person at some point.
You will soon.
Yeah. Let's hope so. Yeah.
I'm looking forward to coming to Taiwan. I lived there for almost 7 years. Very long time.
Yeah, that's right.
Kind of, I feel like it's my home, my real home, even now. I never exhibited at the Lei, right?
I don't think so. No, you played it our way, yeah. Right? But that's the closest you came.
So it'll be like an interesting homecoming.
Yeah, well, it'll be great to have you. Good to have you back.
Same here. I can't wait, actually. So as soon as it's possible, we'll do this.
All right, great. Well, we're looking forward to it. And thanks for talking.
It's a pleasure.